close your eyes. Just for a moment, let the day fade away. And travel back with me, not back to last week or last year, but back so far that you and me and here don't exist yet. Back to a single, silent point of everything and nothing. This is not a story of struggle. It's not a march of progress. It's a lullaby, the longest, slowest, most beautiful lullaby ever told, the story of how the universe, piece by patient piece, built a creature, gentle enough and curious enough to lie in the dark and listen to its own history and drift off to sleep. So get comfortable, let your breathing slow, and let's begin at the only place we can. At the very first dream, forget explosions. Think of a breath. Imagine all of space, all of time, all the energy and possibility that would ever become galaxies, sunflowers, mountain ranges, and the feeling of a cool pillow on a warm cheek. Imagine it all contained in a single, silent point. Then, an exhalation, an unfolding, not violent, but inevitable, a universe dreaming itself into being. For eons, there was just this expanding, cooling fog of pure potential hydrogen and helium atoms drifting in the dark like the gentlest of snowfalls. There was no one to see it, no one to name it. It just was a quiet, beautiful existence. But gravity is a patient artist. It began to gather those atoms together into vast, swirling clouds. And in the hearts of these clouds, pressure built and built until ignition. The first stars, not like our sun, monstrous, magnificent giants, burning brilliant and blue, lighting up the newborn cosmos, and inside their nuclear furnaces, they did a miraculous thing. They cooked. They fused simple hydrogen into heavier elements. Carbon, oxygen, iron, the very ingredients of everything else. These first stars lived fast and died young. And when they died, they did not go quietly. They returned all those new, complex atoms to the universe in great, gentle clouds, stellar nurseries for the next generation. Our sun is a child of one of those later generations, a humble, yellow star. And around it, from that recycled stardust, planets coalesced. One of them, the third rock from that sun, was just right. A molten ball cooling into a sphere of rock and water. It had oceans. It had an atmosphere. It was, in every sense, a cradle. And in that warm, salty cradle, something stirred. Not yet life, but the idea of life. Molecules bumping into each other in the endless tides. Carbon learning to link hands with hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, forming chains, forming rings. A chemical sigh, leaning slowly, inevitably, toward complexity. This is where our lullaby finds its melody, not with a bang, but with a whisper. The whisper of a membrane forming a tiny, oily bubble that separated a little bit of inside from the great, vast outside. The first cell. It was not clever. It had no plans, but it had a singular, miraculous ability. It could maintain itself. It could take in energy from its surroundings. It could, in the simplest sense, be, and in being, it began the long, slow dream of becoming more. This dream would take billions of years. It would move through shapes we can barely imagine. It would invent ways to breathe, to move, to sense, to feel. It would crawl from the sea, grow fur, and learn to hold its young close. It would climb into the trees, and then, one day, stand up on a wide, grassy plain and look at the horizon with new eyes. Every single step of that journey is written into you. The saltiness of your blood and tears is the salinity of that ancient sea. The calcium in your bones was forged in the heart of a long-dead star. The deep, rhythmic need for sleep that brings you here tonight is a rhythm established when life was first learning to navigate the cycle of sun and dark. You are not just listening to history. You are history, a living, breathing, dreaming archive. So as we trace this path together, from stardust to this moment of quiet listening, don't try to memorize dates or names. Just feel the connection. Feel the profound slowness of it all. Let the vast, gentle scale of deep time wrap around your mind like the softest blanket, quieting the small, sharp worries of a single day. We begin as we must, in the dark and the quiet, not with a creature, but with a crucible, in the hearts of those second-generation stars where your atoms were born. Picture not a void, but a nebula. A cosmic cloud, light shears across. It's not empty. It's a fog of dust and gas, glittering where the light of nearby stars touches it. It is serene beyond our comprehension. Silent, but for the vibration of atoms themselves. And it is here, in these deep, quiet cradles, that solar systems are woven. Gravity is the loom, an invisible thread, pulling a few more molecules together here. A gathering of dust there. Over millions of years, the cloud begins to spin, to flatten into a disk. At the center, the density grows. Atoms are pressed together so closely that they grow warm, then hot, then begin to scream with a light and heat all their own. Nuclear fusion begins. A star is born, our sun. In the disk swirling around this newborn star, dust particles collide, stick, form pebbles, then rocks. So here we are, a brand new planet, still warm from its formation, spinning in the silent black. Its surface is one global ocean, broken only by the black spines of volcanic islands. The sky is orange and thick. The air smells of sulfur and salt. To our eyes, it looks completely lifeless, and for a long, long time, it was. But remember, that stardust, it's all here now. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, the Lego bricks of everything alive. They're swirling in that ocean, a cosmic soup, and the planet is anything but quiet. Volcanoes on the seafloor are gushing out hot, mineral-rich water. Like underwater geysers, lightning is crackling through that weird atmosphere. The sun's ultraviolet light is pouring down, way stronger than today, because there's no ozone layer to stop it. To us, that sounds hostile. But to those floating Lego bricks, it's an invitation to dance. It's a chemistry set, the size of a planet, and the energy from the heat, the lightning, the light, it's all shaking the box. Over millions of years, something incredible happens, but it happens so slowly you'd never see it. Those simple atoms start linking up. They form slightly bigger molecules, and then, one day, in the warm, quiet, dark, around a hydrothermal vent, or in a sunlit tide pool that keeps getting dried out and refilled, a molecule forms that can do a magic trick. It can make a copy of itself. We don't know exactly what it looked like. Maybe it was RNA, a simpler cousin of DNA. The point is, it wasn't alive, not even close. But it was a recipe, and in the right conditions, the recipe started making more of itself. This was the first whisper. The universe, which had only known physics and chemistry for billions of years, just invented information, a pattern that could persist. Now the dance gets more interesting. These replicating molecules get wrapped up in little oily bubbles, fatty membranes that form naturally like tiny soap bubbles. These bubbles protect the delicate molecules inside. They create a little in here versus out there. We call these bubbles they are not life, but they are the rehearsal for life. They are the stage where the actors are learning their lines. Inside, the chemistry is getting more complex. Some molecules get good at helping the copying along. Some start figuring out how to use energy from their surroundings, maybe from the vent chemicals, maybe from the sun. They're not eating, not yet. They're just absorbing. Then, the first real innovation. A molecule emerges that can store the instructions for building other molecules. We know it today. DNA, the master blueprint. With DNA in charge, things get organized. The cell can build specific tools, proteins, to do specific jobs. One protein might be good at harvesting sunlight. Another might be good at breaking down a chemical floating by. And just like that, without any fanfare, the line is crossed. A collection of molecules that can maintain itself, use energy, grow, and replicate is alive. The first life was a bacterium. A single, simple cell. No nucleus, no brain, no heart, just a tiny, sturdy bag of chemistry floating in the endless sea. It probably ate chemicals from the vents, a process called chemosynthesis. It was the ultimate minimalist. But then, one of these tiny cells stumbled upon the greatest power source in the solar system, the sun. It developed a new molecule inside itself, green and beautiful. Chlorophyll. This molecule could catch sunlight, like a tiny solar panel, and use that energy to take carbon dioxide from the air and water, from the sea, and glue them together to make sugar. This is photosynthesis. It started slowly, but these new green cells, cyanobacteria, were unstoppable. They spread, they formed vast, slimy mats in the shallow seas, and they had a waste product that would change the world forever. Oxygen. For 2 billion years, these tiny, quiet things pumped oxygen into the water and the air. At first, it was a disaster. Oxygen was a deadly poison to almost all that early life. It caused a mass extinction. But life, as it always does, adapted. Some cells learned to not just tolerate oxygen, but to use it. They developed a new, super efficient way to burn their food for energy. Aerobic respiration. This was like swapping a campfire for a rocket engine. It released way more for 2 billion years. The dream of life was a solo act. One cell, floating, feeding, dividing, a universe of one. It worked. It was stable. But the universe has a tendency toward complexity, toward connection. The next great leap wasn't a new molecule or a new source of food. It was a new idea. Cooperation. Imagine one of those sturdy bacterial cells, after it divides, just not floating away. The two daughter cells stick together. Then they divide again and again, forming a tiny chain or a little cluster. This wasn't a planned society. It was probably just the failure of suppression, a biological oops. But that oops changed everything, because now, the cells in the cluster could start to specialize. One cell on the outside, getting all the sunlight, could get really, really good at photosynthesis. It would share the sugars it made with the cells on the inside, who were protected from the harsh light or predators. Those inner cells, in turn, could specialize in something else, like structural support or reproduction. They were no longer just a group of individuals. They were becoming a single, larger organism. The first multicellular life. Think of it as the first tiny, cellular whisper of a concept we know deeply: community. The whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts. The earliest multicellular life was probably like algae simpo, squishy mats, or filaments in the sea. But the principle was set. From this cooperation, new possibilities exploded. One of the most important was the development of layers. Instead of a random clump, cells began organizing themselves into sheets. First, 2 layers. An outer skin to interact with the world, and an inner gut to process food. Then, a revolutionary 3rd layer in between them. This middle layer was like blank clay. It became the raw material for invention. From it evolved the first muscles for movement, the first networks of nerves for communication, the first internal systems for circulating nutrients and removing waste. This 3-layer blueprint, endoderm, became the universal body plan for nearly every complex animal that would ever exist, from a worm to a whale, including you. Your skin, hair, and nervous system came from the ectoderm. Your muscles, bones, and blood from your lungs, liver, and digestive tract from the endoderm. That ancient tripartite agreement is still the architectural foundation of your body. With these layers came new senses of being. The front and back. You need to know which way you're going. A top and bottom. You need to know where the ground or the sunlight is. Symmetry mirrored left and right side, which allowed for balanced, directed movement. And with movement came a new need to coordinate. If you're going to ripple your body to swim or contract to burrow, all your muscle cells need to act in unison. This required a communication network. Enter the nervous system. It didn't start as a brain. It started as a faint, diffuse net of specialized cells that could conduct tiny electrical signals. A nerve net, you can see it in creatures like jellyfish today. Soft, glowing web of awareness spread throughout their body. It's not thinking, it's not feeling emotion, it's sensing. A gentle touch here creates a gentle ripple of movement there. It's the universe. Through life, becoming aware of pressure, of contact. This is a monumental moment. Before this, life simply reacted to chemistry, light, heat, molecules. Now, for the first time, life was reacting to information about its physical. It was building an internal map of self and not self. And with this new, sensitive body and its faint nerve net, another profound rhythm likely emerged. The cycle of activity and rest. Even a simple animal pulsing through the water expends energy. Its chemical engines need time to replenish. Perhaps it would find a quiet, sheltered spot. Its movements would slow. Its metabolic rate would dip. This isn't sleep, as we know. There is no dreaming, no rapid eye movement. But it is the primordial ancestor of sleep, a necessary, rhythmic retreat from doing back into simply being. For millions of years, life in the sea was soft, jellyfish pulsing, worms burrowing, strange fronds waving in the current. They were beautiful, successful, and vulnerable. Their bodies were sacks of jelly or fluid, pressed into shape by the water around them. To grow bigger, to move faster, to exert force, they needed something new, something strong, but flexible. Acentrao, axis, life dreamed up a rod. It started simply, the note, a flexible, rod-like structure made of a firm, cartilaginous material running from head to tail. Think of it as a garden hose. Under pressure it's stiff, but it can bend. For the first time, An animal had a central support beam. Muscles could attach to it in segmented blocks, pulling against this stable rod to create powerful, side-to-side swimming motions. This was a game changer. The owners of this brilliant invention were the first chord, small, sleek, and probably not much to look at. But inside, they carried the seed of a revolution. The notochord was the prototype, and evolution, once it has a good idea, loves to improve it. The next step was to wrap that notochord in a protective, segmented case of bone or cartilage vertebrae, the vertebral column, the spine. This wasn't just a better rod, it was a fortress for the most precious cargo of all, the spinal cord, the superhighway of the nervous system that had evolved from that simple nerve net. The spine protected this vital information cable, while the gaps between vertebrae allowed nerves to branch off to the limbs and organs. It was architecture and infrastructure in one elegant design. With this central support system, vertebrates could grow larger, stronger, and more complex. In the seas, they diversified into fantastic forms. The first jawless fish, sucking and filtering through the mud. Then, the evolution of jaws, perhaps from modified gill arcusa development that turned gentle filter feeders into active predators. The underwater arms race had begun. But the dream wasn't content with the sea. The land was there, vast, empty, and full of opportunity. Plants had already made the move, carpeting the coasts with low, green mosses, and later, strange, primitive forests. The air was now rich with oxygen. The stage was set. The move to land wasn't a bold, intentional expedition. It was probably a series of tiny, desperate hops for a lobe-finned fish. Like Tiktaalik, life in shallow, weedy, oxygen-poor ponds or tidal flats was tough. Sometimes, the pond might dry up. Sometimes, a bigger predator might be lurking in the deeper water. The fish with slightly stronger, more muscular fins, with bones arranged in a pattern weirdly similar to a land animal's arm. One bone, two bones, lots of little bones. Fingers had an advantage. They could use those fins like paddles to push themselves through the muck. They could maybe even heave themselves onto a log or a rock for a few seconds to gulp air from the atmosphere. Their swim bladders already acting as primitive lungs. Imagine one of these creatures stranded in a shrinking pool, its gills struggling in the warm, soupy water. With a desperate wiggle of its whole body, it pushes with those stout fins, hauling itself through the sticky mud to the next puddle. It's not conquering land. It's just trying to survive another day in the water. But every time it did that, it was writing a new chapter. Over generations, the fins became limbs. The lobe-finned fish gave rise to the first tetrapods, four-limbed. They were likely still mostly aquatic, like salamanders, but they could navigate the shallows, the swamps, and the muddy banks in a way no fish ever could. And with this new realm came new challenges. Gravity, for one. Water is buoyant. Air is not. The spine, so effective for swimming, now had a new job, holding the body up against the relentless pull of the planet, like a bridge holding up its own weight. The vertebrae grew stronger, interlocking more securely. The senses changed, too. Sound travels differently in air. The internal ear structures adapted to catch these new vibrations. The eyes, once suited for the dim, blue-green light of water, adjusted to the brighter, full-spectrum light of the surface world. It was a slow, awkward, muddy transition. These early amphibians probably spent most of their time in the water, laying their jelly-like eggs there. But they had made the irrevocable step. The vertebrate body, Plant the spine, the four-limbed layout, the skull protecting a brain had proven itself adaptable enough to conquer a second element. This body plan is your inheritance. The curve of your neck as you tilt your head on the pillow, that's your cervical spine, a refined version of those frontmost vertebrae. The ache in your lower back after a long day, that's your lumbar spine, bearing the weight that your aquatic ancestors never had to, testament to the great trade-off of standing tall. Every time you stretch, you are feeling the ancient, flexible strength of that first notochord, now encased in bone, still allowing you to bend, to twist, to settle into the contours of your bed. The land was open. The possibilities were endless, but it was a harsh, dry, and variable place compared to the constant embrace of the ocean. To thrive here, not just visit, the vertebrate dream would need to develop a way to create its own stable, internal environment. It would need to learn how to stay warm. The world the early tetrapods found themselves in was unpredictable. The sun beat down, then vanished behind clouds. The night brought a penetrating chill. The water they relied on could dry up or freeze. For a creature whose body temperature simply matched its surroundings, a cold-blooded existence, this was exhausting. Activity was a slave to the weather. But in the shadows of a world soon to be dominated by giants, a new experiment was unfolding. A different way of being was emerging from the vertebrate blueprint. It was an expensive, energy-intensive idea, but a revolutionary one. Create and maintain your own weather. This is the invention of endothermy, warm-bloodedness. Imagine a tiny, shrew-like creature in the undergrowth. Its body is a furnace. Through a furious metabolism burning food at a relentless rate, maintains a constant, high internal temperature. This is not just warmth. This is a stable, internal climate, a personal summer carried everywhere. This came with costs. It required vast amounts of fuel this creature had to eat constantly, every day, to feed its inner fire. But the benefits were extraordinary. It was not shackled to the sun. It could be alert and active in the cool of dawn, in the depth of night, in the chill of a forest shadow. Its muscles could react faster. Its brain, that hungry organ, could grow more complex, fueled by a constant supply of warm, oxygen-rich blood. To insulate this precious warmth, the body grew a new kind of covering. Fur, not scales, not feathers, but millions of fine, interlocking filaments that trapped a layer of warm air against the skin. Fur was more than a coat. It was also a new landscape for sensation. Each hair follicle was connected to a nerve ending, a breeze, a touch. The brush of a blade of grasshole became a symphony of detailed information. Touch, as a profound sense, was born from the need to stay warm. And then, the most profound shift of all, it moved from the outside in. For millions of years, vertebrates had laid eggs. They deposited them in the world and hoped for the best. But for a small, warm-blooded creature living in a world of dinosaurian giants, eggs were terribly vulnerable. The solution was radical. Keep the egg inside. The child would develop not in a static, external egg, but within a specialized chamber inside the mother's own warm, stable, protected body. The mother system would nourish it directly, blood to blood. This was live birth. And when the child was born, small and vulnerable, the care did not stop. The mother's body produced a new, perfect food. Milk, a nourishing, fatty, immune-boosting liquid produced on demand. This required a new bond, a new behavior. The mother had to stay close. She had to nurture, to protect, to teach. This was the genesis of the family. Not a fleeting association for mating, but a prolonged, intimate boned. The investment was enormous, years of care for just a few offspring. But that investment meant the young could learn. Their brains could develop slowly, absorbing the world in safety. Behaviors could be taught, not just inherited. Culture, in its most embryonic form, became possible. Love, in its fierce, protective, nurturing form, has its roots here, in the choice to turn one's own body into a cradle and a larder, in the willingness to burn your own energy to fuel another's life. For over 100 million years, our mammalian ancestors lived like this, small, furry, warm-hearted shadows in a world of reptilian thunder. They scurried in the dark. They raised their tiny pups in hidden burrows. They listened to the earth shake with footsteps that were not their own. They were not the kings of the world, but they were its keepers. Keepers of warmth, of care, of a quiet, persistent future. And then, the world changed. The deep tremor you felt wasn't an earthquake. It was the end of an era. The story goes that a giant rock from space, or perhaps a series of monumental volcanic eruptions, threw the world into a long, cold, dusty night. The details are for another story. The result was this: the great giants, the dinosaurs who had ruled the land, the sea, and the air for over 150 million years, were gone. Their world of thunderous footfalls and reptilian shrieks fell silent. And in that sudden, terrible silence, the small, warm, furry keepers of the hearth found the world had opened up. The niches were empty. The forests and plains were eerily quiet. The age of the mammal had quietly, patiently arrived. But our story doesn't follow the mammals who grew enormous to fill the spaces of giant herbivores, or those who became fierce predators to take the place of tyrannosaurs. Our story follows a different branch, a smaller, more curious branch that looked at the empty world and didn't see a field to conquer, but a tree to climb. Retreat with me, now, into the endless, sun-dappled forests of the early Paleocene epoch. The air is warm and humid. The world is a tapestry of green, from the mossy forest floor to the dizzying heights of the canopy. It is a world of vertical opportunity. Here, the mammalian dream took a turn towards agility and perception. Life in the trees demanded new skills. A misstep wasn't an inconvenience. It was a fatal plunge. First, the limbs adapted. Hands and feet that had been good for scurrying on the ground became expert greepers. The 5 digits developed flexible, sensitive tips. But one digit, the thumb and the big toe, slowly began to rotate to oppose the others. This was the invention of the opposable grip. Imagine the revolutionary power of this. It was no longer about clinging with claws. It was about holding, about wrapping your hand around a branch with secure, confident pressure. This one adaptation would one day allow for the holding of tools, of children, of another's hand. But for now, it was the key to a life in the air. The eyes, too, underwent a revolution. On the ground, an animal's eyes are often on the sides of its head, giving a wide view to spot predators. In the trees, you need to judge distance, to leap from one thin, bending branch to another 10 feet away. You need to know exactly how far that is. So, the eyes migrated to the front of the face. This created binocular, stereoscopic vision. 2 slightly different images from 2 forward-facing eyes are merged by the brain into a single, deep, 3-dimensional picture of the world. The forest was no longer a flat wall of green. It was a complex, layered lattice of pathways, each branch near or far, solid or fragile. The shift in vision also meant these creatures were constantly looking at each other's faces. Reading expressions became a survival skill. And what a social world it was. Living in trees meant living in troops. Safety in numbers, but living in close quarters with your relatives requires ... manners. Complex social rules. Grooming became more than hygiene. It became social glue. Picking insects and debris from each other's fur was a way to bond, to form alliances, to soothe tensions. It was tactile communication. A language of touch that said, "We are family. I care for you. We are safe together." The brain, fueled by a constant supply of warm blood and rich food from the forest, grew more complex to navigate this social and physical maze. It developed new regions for processing touch, for mapping 3D space, and for remembering the intricate web of social debts and alliances. Who groomed you, who stole your fruit, who is a reliable friend. These were the early primates, our family tree. Their days were spent in a kind of mindful, focused play, leaping with exacting precision, foraging for ripe fruit, tender leaves, and the occasional insect, communicating with a growing vocabulary of hoots, grunts, and warning calls, raising their young in the high, leafy cradles of the canopy, teaching them the safe routes through their aerial kingdom. It was a good life, a sheltered life. For tens of millions of years, the primate dream was a dream of forests, of dappled light and swinging vines, of community and careful grip. But the world, as it always does, began to change. The global climate grew cooler, drier. Vast swaths of those endless forests began to shrink, replaced by something new and intimidating: open grasslands, expanses of swaying, golden grass under a huge, empty sky. For some primates, the answer was to retreat deeper into the remaining forest pockets. Their descendants would become the monkeys and apes of the tropical realms. But for one bold, or perhaps just desperate, branch of the family, the shrinking forests forced a choice: adapt to the edge or perish. They ventured down from the trees. They stood at the border between the known world of vertical trunks and the unknown world of the horizontal plane. And they found that their gripping hands, their forward-facing eyes, and their complex social brains were tools that could be repurposed. They could be used not just for swinging, but for walking, not just for spotting fruit, but for scanning the horizon for predators and prey, not just for navigating social trees, but for building social plans to hunt and gather on the ground. The dream was leaving the canopy. It was stepping out, tentatively, onto its own 2 feet. The first steps onto the savanna were not a declaration. They were an experiment in balance. For a creature whose skeleton had been shaped by branches, the ground was an alien and demanding place. The spine, which had served as a horizontal beam for a quadruped, now had to become a vertical pillar. The pelvis, which had cradled the guts of a tree dweller, had to reshape itself into a bowl to support the weight of the entire upper body. The knee and ankle joints had to lock into a straight, stable line to hold a standing posture without constant, exhausting muscle effort. It was awkward. It was slow. In many ways, it was a terrible idea. Bipedalism made them more visible to predators. It was a slower way to run from a lion than a 4-legged gallop. It put immense new stresses on the lower back, the knees, the feet. So why do it? What was worth this pain? The answer was in the hands and in the horizon. By standing upright, the hands were freed, no longer required for locomotion. They were liberated. They could now be full-time manipulators, carriers, and makers. A primate on the ground could now pick up a rock, carry a handful of ripe berries back to a safer spot, or hold a stick to dig for nutritious roots. This was a slow but profound shift from simply finding food to managing it. And the horizon, standing tall, allowed them to see, over the golden grass. They could spot the shimmer of a distant waterhole, the movement of a herd of antelope, or the lurking shape of a predator long before it was upon them. Their world expanded from a few meters of forest floor to miles of open landscape. This vantage point changed their relationship with space and time. They could plan, they could anticipate. These first bipedal apes were not us, they were our ancient cousins. Like the famous Lucy, an Australopithecus afarensis, her brain was still she likely didn't speak, but her skeleton tells the story of a creature caught between worlds. The curved fingers of a tree climber fused into the pelvis of a walker. She and her kind were transitional beings, testing a new way of moving through the world for millions of years. Their lives were likely paced by the sun and the seasons. They foraged for fruits, seeds, tubers, and scavenged the kills of larger predators, using crude stone tools. First, Oldowan chopper stew, crack open bones for marrow. They lived in small, nomadic bands, their social bonds forged in the trees, through grooming now the key to survival on the ground, for sharing food, for watching over the young, for keeping watch at night. And the night, that was the most dangerous time. The land that was open and visible by day became a realm of hidden sounds and unseen threats in the dark. Their tree-climbing ancestors would have sought a high fork to sleep in, safe from ground predators. The savanna offered no such refuge. Their solution was likely to find a rocky outcrop to huddle together for warmth and safety. They would have listened to the chorus of the African night, the whoop of hyenas, the distant roar of a lion with a vulnerability their forest-dwelling ancestors never knew. This profound vulnerability, this shared watchfulness under the stars, may have been the forge that strengthened social bonds into something deeper, more interdependent. The unit of survival was no longer the individual, or even the mother-child pair, but the band, the tribe. The dream was no longer about navigating a lattice of branches, but about navigating a world of time, distance, and shared danger. It was about carrying things, seeing far, and holding onto each other in the immense, star-filled dark. And in that darkness, a discovery waited that would push the dream into a new realm of light, warmth, and community. It was a discovery they would first have feared, then captured, and then, impossibly, learned to keep. For 1,000,000 years, the rhythm had been set by the sun. Work, forage, move in the light. Huddle, fear, listen in the dark. The night was a boundary, a wall. Then they learned to keep the day. It probably started with a lightning strike, a blaze in the dry grass, terrifying, consuming. They would have fled, but afterwards, among the cooled ashes, they might have found a roasted tuber, a charred carcass. The food was softer, richer, easier to digest. The fire had done some of the work of digestion for them. The boldest among them, perhaps, learned to tend a natural blaze, carrying a burning branch like the most dangerous, most precious thing in the world, to a new spot. They learned to feed it, to keep it alive. This was more than a tool. This was the first domestication of energy. The fire wielder was no longer just another animal on the savanna. They were a force of nature, with a portable piece of the sun. Now, imagine the scene as the daylight fades. Instead of a fearful retreat to a dark crevice, the band gathers around their fire. The circle of light pushes back the unknown. Predators, with their instinctive fear of flame, keep their distance. The night is no longer a wall. It is a dome of darkness, at the center of which is warmth, safety, and visible faces. This was a social revolution. The day's work was done. The firelight extended the waking, social hours. In the flickering orange glow, hands were free. There was time not just for survival, but for maintenance, shaping a better stone tool, scraping a hide, and crucially, there was time for the face. Around that fire, the face became a screen for meaning. The play of light and shadow exaggerated a frown, a smile, a look of concern. The old language of grunts and gestures could now be paired with visible, clear expressions. The stage was set for a more complex communication. Perhaps the first consistent, shared sounds words were born here, not in the urgent hunt, but in the calm of the fire watch, naming the things they saw in the flames, telling of the day's events, pointing to the stars above the smoke. The fire did something else, too. Cooked food is predigested. Its energy is more easily absorbed. This new, efficient fuel pipeline allowed the body to redirect energy from a massive, muscular gut to a massive, energy-hungry brain. The skull of Homo erectus shows this shift. A smaller jaw, smaller teeth, but a larger cranial vault. The brain was growing, and the fire was feeding it. And this new human, with a bigger brain and control of fire, did something extraordinary. They began to wander. Homo erectus walked out of Africa. They walked across the land bridges into Asia, to the islands of Indonesia. They endured winters in the Caucasus. They were not fleeing. They were exploring. The dream was now conscious of space, of distance, of the possibility of elsewhere. They carried their fire with them. They carried their simple, elegant hand axes, teardrop-shaped stones, worked on both sides, beautiful in their symmetry. They carried the knowledge of the hunt, of the gather of the way to make a tool that could make another tool. But most importantly, around 1,000 different campfires, under 1,000 different skies, they carried the story. The story of the old one who knew where the water was. The story of the clever hunt that fed the band for days. The story of the child who wandered off and was found. These stories were the glue of memory and identity. They were the first threads of culture, woven in the light of a protected flame, against the great, cold, dark. The dream was no longer just about the body's place in the landscape. It was about the mind's place in the community, in time, and in the immense, starry mystery of the world. They had tamed a piece of the sun, and in its light, they began to see themselves not just as creatures, but as keepers. Keepers of fire, of knowledge, of the next generation. And in one band, in one lineage, the brain crossed a final, invisible threshold. It became capable of a new kind of magic. Not just memory, but imagination. Not just describing what is, but dreaming of what could be, or what once was. It became capable of seeing a shape in a stone and setting it free. Here, in the deepest dark, far from the sun and the wind, the dream changed its shape. For millions of years, the hands had made things for the body. Tools to cut, to scrape, to dig. The mind was a brilliant engineer, solving physical problems. But then, in a quiet evolutionary breath, something new flickered in the neural networks. It wasn't a bigger brain, but a differently wired one, a new kind of consciousness. This was the cognitive revolution. The mind became a theater. It could now hold an idea of something that was not physically present. A memory of last season's migration path. A plan for a hunt tomorrow. The image of an animal held in the mind's eye. And for the first time, there arose a desperate, beautiful need to take that internal image and fix it in the outside world, to make the invisible visible. They entered these caves not for shelter, but for sanctuary. The journey itself, crawling through narrow tunnels into the womb of the earth, was a ritual. And there, by the flickering light of a fat, burning lamp, they reached out a hand stained with ochre and touched the living rock. Sound, a soft, sweeping, gritty sound, like charcoal and earth being rubbed onto stone. They painted not random marks: bison, mammoths, horses, lions. They painted them with breathtaking observation, the tense musculature of a fleeing herd, the heavy pregnant belly of a mare. But these were not pictures of animals as food. They were often painted over one another in sacred, reused spaces. They were painted in parts of the cave where no one lived, where the only purpose was to come and see them. They were painting essences: the spirit of the bison, the power of the lion. In painting it, perhaps they believed they could commune with it, honor it, or capture some of its strength for themselves. This was not utility. This was religion. This was art. And it wasn't just on walls. From the dark soil of Germany, we find the Lion Man, a figure carved from mammoth ivory, over 40,000 years old. It has the body of a man, but the head of a cave lion. It is a being that does not exist in nature, painstakingly carved over hundreds of hours. It is the first evidence of the imagination, the ability to combine concepts from the real world into something entirely new, mythical, and powerful. The dream was now dreaming its own creatures. The symbolism turned inward, too. On the shores of ancient lakes, we find tiny, delicate shell beads, carefully pierced and worn, ochre pigment ground fine for painting on skin. This was not about warmth or protection. This was about identity, about beauty, about saying, I am part of this group, or I am someone who has seen the sacred. And then, the most poignant evidence of all, they began to bury their dead. Not abandonment, not disposal. Burial. They would place the body in a pit, often curled in a sleeping position. They would sprinkle it with red ochre, the color of blood, of life. They would place stone tools, beads, and joints of meat beside them, supplies for a journey. At a site called Shanidar, in what is now Iraq, they buried a man with clusters of flowers: yarrow, cornflower, hollyhock, medicinal, bright, purposeful flowers. This was not a casual act. This was tenderness. This was ceremony. It speaks of a belief that the end of breath was not the end of the story. It suggests grief, love, and a hoper, a question about what lies beyond the final veil. Around their campfires now, the stories grew richer. They were no longer just about where the water was. They were about the time the spirit of the bear taught them a song. They were about the heroes of old who stole fire from the sky. They were about the stars and how they were the campfires of the ancestors watching over them. The dream had become self-aware. It knew it was dreaming. And in that awareness it felt new, profound things. The ache of beauty before a painted wall, the solemnity of ritual, the deep sorrow of loss, the burning curiosity about the great mysteries of life, death, and the world around them. They were no longer just clever, social, tool-using apes. They were meaning makers. They were artists, shamans, and storytellers. They lived in a world that was physically real, but also vibrantly alive with unseen forces, ancestors, and spirits. The universe had grown a mind that could look upon its own vastness and feel wonder and fear and a deep, longing love. This was the birth of the human spirit. And this spirit, hungry for meaning and connection, was about to take its most ambitious step yet. It would stop wondering and put down roots. It would try to build a world in its own image from the ground up. The dream, which had learned to paint on cave walls and bury its dead with flowers, now turned its attention to the most unlikely canvas of all, the earth itself. For hundreds of thousands of years, they had followed the food, the migrating herds, the ripening berries. They were children of the seasons, passengers on a moving landscape. But then, in a few separate, fertile corners of the world, the hills of the Fertile Crescent, the banks of the Yangtze, the highlands of Mexico. A new, patient idea took root. They noticed that if you dropped a seed where you had camped, a plant might grow there next year. They began to favor certain grasses with plumper, less shattering seeds. They cleared competing plants. They saved the best seeds for the next planting. This was not an invention, but a slowly deepening partnership with specific strands of life: wheat, rice, maize. This was the Neolithic Revolution, the shift from hunting and gathering to agriculture. It was not an obvious upgrade. The farmer's life was harder, in many ways, than the forager's. It was back-breaking labor. It tied them to one patch of land through flood, drought, and blight. Their diet became less varied, more reliant on a few starchy staples. Their bones show new stresses, new deficiencies. So why do it? Perhaps for a simple, powerful reason. Predictability. A granary is a bulwark against the whim of nature. It is stored time, stored sunlight. It is the ability to say, we will be here through the winter. It allowed populations to grow, to settle, to build not just camps, but homes. And from these homes, villages grew. Then towns. Then something entirely new on the face of the earth. The city. A city is a human ecosystem, a web of specialized dreams. Not everyone had to grow food. One person could become a potter, shaping clay from the riverbank into vessels for grain and water. Another could become a weaver, turning flax or wool into cloth. Another could become a mason, stacking mud bricks into permanent walls. Another could become a scribe. The scribe. This was perhaps the most magical specialization of all. They began with simple marks on clay: a wedge for a bushel of grain, a circle for a sheep. This was accounting, the birth of writing from bookkeeping. But from these practical marks bloomed something miraculous. Those wedges, cuneiform, or pictures, hieroglyphs, could be arranged to record not just quantities of barley, but the deeds of a king, the laws of the people, a prayer to a god, the story of a great flood. Writing broke the chain of memory. Knowledge could now outlive the person who knew it. It could travel. The dream became permanent, transmittable. With permanence came new abstractions. They looked up from their fields and their ledgers and watched the sky with a new kind of eye. They saw patterns in the chaos. The sun's path shifted with the seasons, dictating the time to plant and harvest. The moon cycled, a reliable clock in the night. The planets wandered on their own mysterious paths. They built great stones to mark the solstices, like at Stonehenge. They mapped the stars into constellations: the shepherd, the bull, the scorpion. This was astronomy, born from the practical need to calendar, but flowering into a profound act of cosmic storytelling. The sky was no longer just a roof. It was a great turning clock, a map of stories, the dwelling place of gods who controlled the rain and the sun. By reading it, they felt they could participate in the order of the universe. But this new, woven world had a dark underside. Stored grain was wealth, and wealth could be stolen or hoarded. Leadership, once informal and based on wisdom or charisma, could harden into inherited hierarchy: kings and priests who controlled the surplus, and thus the people. Walls were built not just to keep animals out, but other humans. The concept of us and them sharpened. War, which had existed in smaller forms, became organized, a tool of state. The dream had traded the vast, unpredictable freedom of the savanna for the security and complexity of the woven world. It gained community, art, law, science, and the accumulated wisdom of generations. It lost a certain wildness, a certain lightness of being. They had become weavers of crops, of cloth, of social bonds, of stories on clay and patterns in the stars. They had built a reality so intricate and compelling that they could almost forget they were animals who had recently stood upright on an open plain, marveling at the horizon. And in the quiet of their stone houses, lit by oil lamps, listening to the sounds of their own dense creation, a new kind of quiet thought could emerge. A thought that turned inward, a thought that began to examine the dreamer itself. The story was no longer just about survival, or society, or the gods. It was beginning to ask, what is this mind that does all this weaving? What is this eye that lies awake in the night, listening? We have come a long, long way together, from a silent point of all potential to the first roar of a star, from a warm tide pool where molecules learn to dance, to the deep, communal gaze around a campfire, from the careful grip on a tree branch to the hand that paints a bison in the sacred dark. It is the longest story ever told, and every single step of it, every twist and turn was necessary to lead to this exact, quiet moment, to you, lying in the dark, listening. Let's retrace the thread one last time. The calcium that forms the tiny bones in your inner ear, allowing you to hear the faintest sound that was forged in the heart of a dying star over 5 billion years ago. The salt balance of your blood, the very ocean within you, is a recipe written when life was nothing more than a membrane trying to keep the inside in and the outside out. The deep, rhythmic need to sleep that has brought you here tonight. That pulse of rest is an ancient legacy from the first simple creatures that learned to sync their lives with the sun. Your body still honors that primordial treaty with the light. Your spine, with its gentle curve against the mattress, is the story of a fish that learned to walk on land. Your breath, slow and even now, is the gift of an atmosphere built by trillions of tiny, quiet lives over 2 billion years. The warmth you feel under your blanket is your mammalian inheritance. The fierce metabolic furnace that allowed your ancestors to be curious in the cold, to care for their young through the night. Your mind, which has followed this story, which worries and wonders and loves that, is the product of the campfire circle, of the painted cave, of the first story told to make sense of the stars. You are not just a biological creature. You are a meaning maker. You are the universe's way of understanding its own beauty. So when the worries of your day, the sharp, small anxieties of this single human life feel too heavy, remember the scale of the story you are part of. Your worries are real, but they are also temporary. They are like a single note in a symphony that has been playing for 13.8 billion years. The mountain does not worry. The river does not rush. The galaxy turns in its slow, majestic dance, utterly unconcerned with the minute-to-minute struggles of one of its conscious inhabitants. You are allowed to rest. In fact, your body, your very cells, are begging for it. They are following a rhythm older than thought. So let's begin the gentle work of returning, not to nothing, but to the source. A guided letting go. Feel the weight of your body on the bed. That weight is a gift of gravity, the same force that gathered stardust into planets. Listen to your own breath, coming in and going out. That air was breathed by dinosaurs, by the first forests, by your countless ancestors. Feel your heartbeat steady in your chest. That rhythm is the echo of the first pulsating cell, the first simple, living drumbeat in a silent sea. Now, imagine all of time, not as a line rushing forward, but as a deep, quiet pool. You are floating on its surface. The ripples of today are already fading, blending back into the still, vast water. Let the images of the long story drift through your mind, not as facts to remember, but as pictures to watch float by. See the nebulae, swirling in silent splendor. The gentle green slime in a sunlit sea. The determined footstep of a lobe-finned fish in the mud. The trusting grip of an infant primate in its mother's fur. The awe on a face illuminated by the first tended fire. The solemn, caring hands placing flowers in a grave. You are all of these things. You carry them with you. They are not a burden. They are your foundation. You are built on eons of resilience, connection, and wonder. Now, let the images go. Let the story soften into a feeling. The feeling of being profoundly, unshakably connected. A part of something so vast and so ancient that your individual cares can be held gently and then released into its calm expanse. You are the universe, grown complex enough to tell itself a bedtime story. The story is told. The teller is tired. It is time to rest. From stardust to cell to creature to you, the journey continues now in silence, in the dark, in the peaceful work of repair and dreams. Good night,